So a warm welcome to everybody around the world. It's a big pleasure for me to have you with us. The sixth session of the Virtual Ops 2020 season. And today we are going to discuss about the digital enablers. And before we start, I suggest that we are starting with a small introduction round. Maybe Sapna, you are starting with you first.
Hello, everybody. I'm Sapna. I'm a consultant to the iFlight suite of products. That's the airline operations products in IBS. Have been lucky enough to work with airlines like British Airways, KLM, Virgin Atlantic, Cathay Pacific, even Jet. So everywhere across the globe now with FedEx also. So it's been a pleasure and it's been a learning journey. Good to meet you here. Would love to share ideas with you.
Christine, going to Canada.
Good morning, everyone. I spent almost 20 years with Air Canada, recently left. Most of my experience was in business process engineering, and if the SB is correct, I worked with Mr. Steve Bogie on the implementation of the Enterprise Resource Planning System, which is known as TRAX.
Mr. Bogie, the stage is yours before we move to the United States.
Okay, and Kirsten is absolutely correct. We did work together, and very similarly, I've spent, well, we'll just say a while in aviation. We won't get too carried away with dates. Most recently, I was managing director IT for Air Canada. I now own and operate my own consulting business, working with a number of organizations, primarily in North America, but scattered around the world. And one of the things we did be interested in this is we did implement a number of digital features on the ops side of the space, flight operations, in-flight service, maintenance, and Air Canada continues to do that as we go forward. So thanks, Daniel. I'll turn it back to you.
Evan, the stage is yours.
Oh, thank you. Evan Bookbinder, currently with American Airlines. I've also been in the industry long enough to not want to say how long I've been doing it. I have spent time in the operations space, in hub operations, system operations. Currently, I'm in IT. I support our network planning organization.
Yeah, and my name is Daniel Stecher. I'm a 51-year-old Berliner in Germany, and I'm since 25 years in the travel transportation industry, and since 3.5 years with an amazing company called IBS Software, or also known as industry's best kept secret. And yeah, I met Steve Bogie, I think 2012, we were meeting the very first time. And I think we are both working on airline operations improvement and digitization. What I done 2017, I invented this event series Ops 2020. Unfortunately, after being in Dubai and Miami and Berlin from 17, 18, 19, we cannot make it in person this year, because a little thing is disrupting big systems, societies, and organizations. But we thought, why not making use of technology? Because that's exactly also the thing of digitization, to make use of available technology. And that's why we have now this Virtual Ops 2020 event series. Interestingly, also, I can already announce that Steve is going to be a guest speaker on the 26th of August. I'm already looking forward to that. And we are going to discuss the new not normal together with Steve Bogie and hopefully many guests. So Sapna, the stage is now yours, speaking about digital enablers for lean and agile airline operations.
Great. Thank you, Daniel. Let me just share my screen. Can you see my presentation, the first slide?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Still able to? Okay, great. Thank you for being here. Understand you all are industry veterans from listening to your experience, and you also have experienced maybe more than one airline crisis during your tenure. and also, I'm sure, great thinkers who have been thinking about what opportunities can come out of this crisis. And that's exactly what we want today. We have been discussing with our virtual communities and reaching out to our customers and understanding what's going on. So in today's presentation, you would see their thoughts. It's kind of a global sharing of information about how they are managing, what's the best practices that they are coming out with, get inputs and opportunity information from you as well, and keep building that kind of a global world knowledge base about how best to manage the situation and the reopening scenarios. That's kind of the objective of today's meeting, and I hope you can bring out the opportunities that you see in these difficult situations. So when we have been talking to our partner airlines and in our virtual hours with them, they tell us that the situation they talk about two different scenarios, the one till before June and one after June. They see it as kind of distinct scenarios. The one before that, for example, the Abyss in April, it seemed as if everything had retracted to 2006 levels, worse than the 9/11 or the 2008-9 financial crisis. They were talking about RPK dropping by minus 93%, even cargo tons carried dropping by more than 27.7%. United bleeding around $60 million per day. Some airlines like Compass and Transstate, which we had conversations with, having to go down. Our friends LATAM, Avianca, Aeromexico restructuring their operations. The airlines were operating at 10% capacity at that time, and there was a prediction by ICAO that 2020, compared to business as usual, the revenue loss is going to be around 350 billion for the airline industry. So April was kind of an abyss, but then there was a distinct upswing from June, July period onwards at all of the airlines we were talking to. We see good news, the US airline industry and the Europe airline industry building bridges between each other, trying to bring in pilot testing of passengers going to travel. Our friends TUI was saying that TUI holiday bookings had gone up by more than 50% in the first 2 weeks of July, which is great. Lufthansa, who we work with, was saying, 80 plus European destinations open, 30 plus external destinations open, which is great news. And Delta saying 30% capacity open in July, etc. So good news starting to come in, but yeah, there is still a lot of unpredictability in the world. Interesting that they were saying that the message coming out of them was similar to what was coming out of the WHO chief, that is, speed trumps perfection. We live by the day, and perfection and airline operations perfection especially is the enemy of emergency management. That's some of the kind of messages that were coming out. And we were asking them, what are your immediate priorities when you were managing this crisis? And four main angles were coming out. So So the main four priorities at this time was how do we respond quickly to customer demand bubbles that were popping up here and there and at the last moment? How do we control cost and improve our liquidity situation? How do we keep up with all the operational safety changes and regulations that bodies like ICAO and IATA and EASA and everybody was bringing in, and still give our customers and our staff confidence that yes, it's safe to travel? And also, most importantly, how do we ensure that our limited resources are productively utilized, be it aircraft or be it crew or be it their staff members back in office? So these were the major four priorities, which we call the CRISP matrix. But they were also saying something interesting, that while they were doing this, since this is not a normal disruption period, it's kind of a more extended disruption period, they were able to rethink their business processes, their practices of people or projects or their IT strategies, which were kind of resulting in the concept of, the Michael Hammer's MIT concept of business process reengineering. A jolt in the airline world that has created reset mindset or a rethinking mindset that has bringing out more reset or re-engineered processes or agile processes into practice. So that's going on at airlines that we are talking about. To say around 70% of the airlines were saying there's some kind of rethinking of processes that's happening. And best of all, yeah.
By the way, if you have any question, Christine, even or Steve, just speak up or raise the hand in the tool and then shoot your question to someone, please.
Yes, because I'm very notorious to keep going on. So please interrupt me whenever you want to. Right. So they were also saying that in the long run, these kind of rethinking business processes and IT strategies would bring out some best practices that would seep through and make the airlines more disruption-proof and more resilient to face these kind of problems in the future better, and which they term, or 70% of the people that we talk to termed as a new operational normal. But 30% still believed in just retracting to what the situation was prior to COVID. So this is the message actually, and to add on to this, we'd also bring in how digitization and technology helps in the short term as well as long term best practices and strategies. So what we're going to look at is we drill down deep into what we have been hearing from our partner airlines in different geographical regions. A bit of more focus can be brought in the America side. How about how they are doing these 4 priorities, what they see as improving and what they see as sustaining as best practices, especially in the usage of digital tools. That's how I've organized this session. Stop me if you have any questions.
So Steve, when we were discussing your tagline for the slot you are giving on 26th of August, you were deciding to speak about the new not normal, and now here we see the new operational normal. So what came in your mind that you were selecting this new not normal?
Well, so there's a couple of things, Daniel, and maybe I'll kind of refute, or at least give you my view of what Snap had said a minute ago, and you're getting, I think we have not seen this type of downturn. Initially a lot of people talked about 9/11 and comparing to 9/11. What we're experiencing is not as regionalized as what 9/11 was. It has much more significant, broader impact on the economy, and therefore, I think specific to aviation, the general feeling is, and I think they're right, business travel is going to be very slow to come back. It is going to significantly impact revenue and yields, and that is going to put a significant cost pressure on the operation side of the business, which tends to be the lion's share of the cost side of the organization. So, I agree, while there is opportunities for streamlining and efficiency, and certainly there is profound opportunities. And I say that, because I think these are things we haven't taken advantage of or haven't forced up, with mobile, with digital, with, AI, with machine learning. All of these things can come to bear. And I think, there is going to be a focus, a heightened focus, and a necessity almost. I don't want to kind of overstate it, but if some carriers that are not strong financially have the wherewithal to make these changes, they will not survive without profound change on their cost structure. And I look at Air Canada in the same way. A lot of the tier 1 carriers around the world, or the legacy carriers, have been unable to shed some of the legacy costs. And, there I think is the exposure in certainly the short and medium term, because we don't even understand what the new not normal or the new normal is. So we're trying to create something when we don't actually understand the problem we're trying to solve at this point in time. And it was interesting. I sat on a CIO panel yesterday, and they talked about trust and actually building trust and confidence within the travel industry in particular. But you think about travel is no different than going to a mall, going to a restaurant, and all those economic drivers that are required. So how do we build confidence and trust into this equation so that Daniel feels comfortable getting back on an airplane in the middle seat? Because I know it's an ongoing debate, but the reality of life is, you take 2/3 of the economy cabin or 1/3 of the economy cabin out. If let's just say we arbitrarily did that, there is now no formula traditionally that actually says that airplane or that route will ever make money. So the middle seat's got to be a reality of the future and the revenue that goes along with it. And then the trust, the confidence, and all those things that go with that. So, sorry, got off on a bit of a roll there, but I think a long answer, Daniel, to your question. And
yeah, but I like it very much, because I think you are somehow speaking now about also an emotional thing. Trust is a feel, and that I think that's all about. And knowing that 80% of decisions are based on feelings and not on facts, and that's something where I'm totally agree with you. No, but thank you for your answer, and maybe we continue with Sapna, because I have already many more questions in my mind.
Thanks very much, Steve. Yeah, I totally agree that trust and confidence is very important to bring back that confidence to get back in the air.
And it will be then also interesting to know what is the trust building factor that airlines are doing business transformation without a COVID-19, because hopefully we will have COVID-19 soon gone, but then what is in 3 years time, 5 years time, 10 years time? Hopefully we don't have any COVID, you name it, that also airlines are making business transformation and have the trust to do it. That will be later on a question to you, Steve and Christine, and even just to have an anchor already set in your mind.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So yeah, no, it's okay. So Daniel, I'd maybe just kind of add into that. I don't think that's a one-time answer. I think, the one thing that the one, if you will, positive that's can't come out of this is we have proven that work from home and mobile workforces or removed workforces are absolutely doable. So how do you then undo that and say, okay, I'm not only going to spend the money to put somebody back on an airplane to go to a meeting, as opposed to the trust, add in the trust factor. I think we've created, this trust and this confidence has many facets to it, and I think it's not a one-time, okay, I feel comfortable about COVID. I mean, take the COVID equation out. We're having a perfectly great conversation today on this topic. Why would I possibly spend, and pick a number, $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 to fly to Berlin to see you? Not that I don't like Berlin, and not that I don't like you, but as a reasonable business assumption, why would I do that? So I think
Maybe because we want to have lunch together, or maybe I want to show you something which is only visible in Berlin. For example, some remaining parts of the Berlin Wall. So maybe that's convincing you and trust building to come to Berlin again, which is the greatest spot on earth, of course.
Of course.
So meanwhile, we have also Maria from Lufthansa Technik in the call. Maybe you would like to introduce yourself shortly. Maria, are you on mute?
Perhaps
okay, we continue.
If I could just add something in with regard to the point that Steve was making about trust. About, I'll say 8 years ago, maybe 9, I don't remember, but we had a chief operating officer named Klaus Gersch, who later went on to work at British Airways. And when he came in, he started positing the question, what kind of company is this? What kind of company is Air Canada? And my automatic answer was transportation. And his answer was customer service. So yes, we are Air Canada is transporting people from A to B to C, but in order to do so, you have to have trust to get on your airplane. So I've been having this struggling actually for the past week. I've been listening to a podcast, one of whom is the former CEO of Spirit Airlines. I don't remember his name, but they were talking about, I was listening to older episodes, and they were talking about how the big 4 US carriers initially were all blocking off the middle seat. And then a couple of weeks after that, and I believe this goes back to May, were adding back in the middle seat. And then of course there was always the issue that single aisle aircraft, they don't have a middle seat. So do you just sell one seat in each aisle? It doesn't make sense. And I was kind of surprised that Air Canada jumped forward and got rid of the blocking off the middle seat. But then I thought, why not now? Why not? Hello. Why not open up the middle seat and go ahead and try to fill it, while of course having the very flexible modification possibility that if someone was not comfortable to fly that flight because it was too full, they could change their flight for a later flight. So I think this is my feeling today, and it might change tomorrow. I think that airlines need to open up their operation to what they believe right now will be the eventual reality, and then go from there, because I don't think COVID's not going away. I believe now that we have to learn to coexist with COVID and anything else that comes up in its stead. Having started Air Canada in 2001, my first experience was 9/11, and then there was SARS, and then there were a couple of downturns, and then COVID. So this is not going away. We're not going to stop having crises in the aviation industry, and we're not going to stop having to force to be agile and spin and write new playbooks on how to ground 500 aircraft. We need to be prepared for that. So in essence, COVID has given people an opportunity, one, to learn how to spin and transform their business based on a decision that might change day to day. And also, to Steve's point, working from home is a reality that can happen for a lot of people. There were so many jobs at Air Canada that were absolutely categorically refused to be work from home jobs. Those people have become some of the most efficient now. So, oh, sorry, waving to my daughter. So please go on.
But that's a good statement, talking about working from home. So also looking now on the slide from Sapna, and knowing that Air Canada has a fantastic SOC, one of my favorites, like very much this parliament style and so on. So how probable is it that an Air Canada is going to give up his headquarter, saving the cost for it, and let all the employees who are available and necessary for keeping the operations running, the COVID operation or the post-COVID, which is then in certain time frame at the level than pre-COVID. Is this possible, or is this something which will not be possible because technology is not there, people are not open to do that, or is there, maybe that's the future? Steve, what do you think? Working from home and crew tracking from home and ops controlling from home and maintenance controlling from home and duty managing from home?
You know, to be very candid, Daniel, I think it's a matter of time. I don't think we're quite there yet. You know, we looked at this back in March and April as we looked at options. You know, should we have a positive test within our operational control center and what we would do? And the one stumbling block, to be very candid, that from a technology perspective, was not necessarily the traditional data and the technology. It was actually the voice communications between the flight dispatch, the maintenance control groups, and the aircraft. That actually became the stumbling block. The you know, actual tracking of crews, we could have actually worked ourselves around. So, you know, I think over time, as you start to reduce voice communications and voice over IP over satellite becomes much more of a reality. You know, when Elon Musk gets his low Earth satellites and there's, you know, 5G broadband speed in all corners of the planet, you know, then these types of things become very real.
The only thing which might interfere is that the dog is biting your leg and then you're taking the wrong decision in the crew tracking. That's something we have to work on it.
I have that problem today, so.
So Sapna, please go on.
Yeah, okay. So some of the points you were mentioning, even other airlines were talking about, so I've divided them into those 4 priorities, and it's interesting to know how much of work from home other airlines are also thinking and how they think it's going to last. So we will come to that in the flow of things. Overall, one of the analysis that was conducted by FT and Apex found that around they had checked with around 900 airline and airport professionals. And what came out was more than 63.7% of them believed that COVID and post-COVID situations would trigger more digital transformation and a rethinking of IT practices and IT infrastructure. The respondents seem to think that it's going to be more of a longer-term usage of digital tools and practices than short-term, you know, immediate emergency response kind of usage. We also, when we talked to airlines, we also found that why is it that in the short term airlines are not digitizing much? So I borrowed a graph, if you see, from Lufthansa Consulting over here. And pre-COVID situation, you can find out that in most of the areas like crew control, operations control, maintenance control, there only seems to be around 40% of state-of-the-art systems. And the remaining 60% are either outdated or they have new systems, but which are not really sufficient for the near future. That's a large amount of non-digitization that's happening. But this, there is a view that this can be improved in the long term. Why is it that short-term effectiveness is lower? Airlines were saying that there is a lack of belief in the technological tools and practices that are available on the maturity that they have to manage the crisis in the short term, especially disruptions and recovery. And there's also a very high level of trust on qualitative expertise, especially in these kind of unpredictable scenarios. And it's a good point that you mentioned earlier about remote workforce and shift pace of workings that can catch on. This was also one of the concerns that airlines has raised, that cybersecurity. We are seeing more of cybersecurity issues during these times, and they were concerned about that as well. And their trust in secure, highly performing digital tools that help in fast recovery is not high enough. It's not there. So that's something that came out of our analysis.
And, Evan, I have a question on that. Being with American Airlines, the largest airline in the world, and having a very strong IT department, and I believe still pretty much some legacy systems around. You are not world record holder, that's still United, but I think you share second or third place together with Delta. How do you see this graphics and situation? Is this something where you also see improvement areas for your own airline? And what is the reason to do so many things in-house and not go to market? Is the technology not available?
It's a good question, Daniel. I think the technology is available. I think there's plenty of opportunities for transformation. For a legacy carrier like American Airlines, which of course is really a merger of several different legacy carriers, the new American Airlines, and a lot of the effort that our company has had to exert since the merger, the last merger with US Airways, really is trying to right size, even before COVID, trying to right size the airline, trying to align all the various legacy systems into one cohesive system. That was enough of a challenge. And then to introduce the idea of moving to newer technology, I think is daunting. Certainly in practice, it's possible, but there's a psychological barrier there to, we're trying to make sense of all of the various things that we have, and to introduce something new is really daunting. I think another thing, and across these adoptions, I would be willing to bet that American Airlines is probably on the lower side of a lot of those statistical categories, simply because of the mass and the size of the airline coming into the merger. To answer your question, I think that the tendency of American Airlines to develop in-house comes down to a few things. I think that there's there's a bit of pride in realizing that we can create a lot of solutions custom tailored for American Airlines. One of the concerns that we tend to have is third-party vendors, off-the-shelf solutions require a lot of customization to meet what the existing operational parameters for American Airlines are. Right or wrong, there's certainly opportunities there to align our processes with a solution. I think that that's always valid.
So if I'm putting the perspective a little bit, not confrontational, but pretty extreme, imagine now we have a flood of the IOC of American Airlines. All the people are safe. Maybe the disaster site is also flood. Would American Airlines then build a third site and put exactly all the legacy systems together which are in place now, or would they do something different?
I would like to think we would do something different. I'm certainly a proponent of moving forward, doing something different. And I think there is an opportunity for that. I think you're starting to see it, and particularly now, what Sapna had mentioned earlier in the presentation, that this situation, the COVID situation, has presented airlines with the opportunity to really take bold moves and make some risks. And I think technology is one of those risks, and I think we're looking at that for sure.
Yeah, that's a good statement. I just remember our Minister of Economy saying the time of endless discussions and talks is over. We need to take bold decisions, quick decisions. And if, of course, COVID-19 has many negative effects, but that's one of the silver lining, that in certain areas suddenly things are possible which were always out of discussion and never ever a possibility, and suddenly things are done. So that's maybe, hopefully, COVID-19 is also enabling the airlines to really do things which are necessary to be done.
Yeah, and I think in closing, the last point I would make is, this situation really has forced airlines, American Airlines and others as well, to realize that the window that we have, the time that we have to respond to crises has really shrunk. It's very much smaller. In normal times, from the moment that we decide to schedule, to put out a certain flight schedule till the day of operation was traditionally 7 to 9 months. And I think that reality is changing. I think what we're realizing now is that not only do we have a need to make those decisions perhaps within 1 or 2 months, but we need the ability to make those decisions and implement those decisions. And that's really where technology, the opportunity for developing new technology comes into play, is to help airlines, legacy airlines in particular, shift from that mentality of months and months of planning down to perhaps weeks of planning prior to an operation.
That's a very interesting point, because I think your background is network and schedule management, and historically airlines, as you rightly said, they plan months ahead, and also the schedule is released 2 seasons in advance, if I'm correct. How does this affect if we are now knowing that some airlines are just planning on a 2 to 3 days horizon? Is this then also affecting that airlines are not working in the future like they worked before, and that more on the day of ops, and the day of ops is maybe extended to a week of ops, and within this group everything is be done? Would you think that would be possible?
It's certainly possible. I don't know if it's probable, particularly for a large carrier. I think there's still going to be a process of having to plan months in advance. Certainly the distribution channels, publication channels need to be out there. Passengers need to be able to make their purchases months in advance. But I think the operational window, I think, will grow, and the planning window will shrink. And somewhere in the middle is where the opportunities to get our systems really to communicate faster, to allow crew bidding to occur faster and more seamlessly, to allow maintenance planning to be faster. I think there's still going to be the need for forecasting in the future, but the ability to take those forecasts to business, into the operation, is where the improvements need to come to allow us to make those changes more nimbly and quickly and put them out to market faster.
So having Maria on the call, your sound issue is solved, Maria?
I hope so. Can you guys hear me?
Very good. Yeah, very good. So before you introduce yourself, and knowing that we have with Christine, and maintenance expert, and now knowing that things are so fluent and everything is short term, how is this also affecting Lufthansa Technik and the spare part management? If suddenly it's not a long-term scheduling anymore, and suddenly maybe spare parts have to be brought, but on the other hand, with all the limiting factors, that suddenly you don't have this wide network anymore. Maybe you can share some thoughts on that and how technology is helping there.
I'm trying to catch up with the conversation, Daniel, so I'm sorry if you caught me off guard. But I think what's happening with Lufthansa Technik is goes beyond the technology topic. What happens to us is the short-term work schedule that we are under. But certainly being a more digitized company would help us, and would help us overcome the difficulties of the short-term work, and being able to, to have all the network closer and more coordinated. That's what I can tell you. Yeah.
Thank you. Sapna, please go on.
Great. So it's interesting to hear the views earlier, and we'll also look at how many airlines agree with you on these points. And I'm getting a treasure trove of information. Thank you. So on this point of technology enabling these transformations, be it short-term or long-term, some of our partner airlines had to say this, that since they see this as a kind of different disruption phase, considering its longer and higher impact, they see there is an opportunity of integrating more technology into the short-term revival phase, and that integration of technology flowing on to the long-term transformation process. Let's now drill down into each of the priorities of the airlines and see what airlines are doing and saying here, and also understand what you have to say on these topics. We've already been discussing some of these. For example, the primary thing that's happening is how airlines are responding to the unpredictable customer demand. So our partners were pointing out different things like their response will depend on how soon customer demand and customer ability to travel and customer confidence to travel will return, which in turn depends on how fast their purchasing power improves, as the economy improves, how fast the country travel restrictions are being lifted, how how confident is the airline's communication about the safety of traveling, like Air Canada's 220 safety message that it has been giving out. How coordinated is that message with what government is saying? And also, how soon is the containment measures and the vaccines going to come out? So, talking to airlines, these were the four scales, that high-level scales that determine how the revival of demand is going to work. And ICAO had interesting theories of four different ways the airlines can come back. So I was talking to a colleague a friend in American last week, and he was saying that within American, they think it's going to be W-shaped. But I was talking to somebody else in Europe, and they were saying it could be L-shaped. So it's still very unpredictable how things are going to come back. And you see that there's also a kind of linkage to how the world GDP is coming back. So if that's L-shaped, this could also be L-shaped. So that's a vicious circle, isn't it? Airlines, GDP linkage. And there was also points pointed out in how many years they think the operations coming back to a 2019 level. So U.S. airline industry, an analysis done between A4A and Goldman Sachs felt that it's 2023 that things are going to return to 2019 levels. And they also mentioned that when they looked at 330-day plus booking values, it was 80% lower than the 2019 levels. That's A4A analysis.
And here's exactly also this confidence or trust thing what Steve mentioned earlier. So I think, Steve, you find exactly your own thinking here in the graphics, isn't it?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Daniel. And the other part that this is interesting is, there's four, arguably you could call 5 different scenarios, and nobody's sure which one is going to follow. And the reality is it'll probably be none of these, is the way this will play itself out. In fact, I think we've seen, you mentioned W, and I think we've seen a little bit of that. And, there was some confidence started. Started, and now you're starting to see some negative numbers come out of the confidence levels with relaxation. And, I won't call it a wave 2, but, in a lot of areas of the world where we've seen relaxed restrictions, you've seen cases start to climb again, and this is going to cause people to pull back. And that confidence level is going to be eroded, and it's going to take longer to gain it back. The other thing that I would say is, this is one where this is an industry issue. This isn't a American Airlines issue. This is not a U.S. issue or an Air Canada issue. Or, all it's going to take is one or, a number of cases on, that are linked to travel on an aircraft, and the whole industry is going to suffer again. So, this all makes me, for me, if I was a CFO at one of these large organizations, I would, or the commercial organization, I would feel very uncomfortable trying to look forward any more than literally days and weeks at this point in time.
Thank you.
And there was also interesting information coming out of airlines we talked to that more than 61% of their bookings were now happening 0 to 3 days before the travel. So very close travel demand predictions, thus resulting in them having to respond to that very quickly, the point that Ivan was mentioning earlier and Steve was mentioning earlier. So they also said that in the US side especially, the earlier rebound of demand would be, as you said, more from domestic as well as vacationer kind of leisure traffic. and less so from business traffic. Because as you rightly said, pointed out, Steve, earlier, it is difficult now that we are now conversing through the virtual means. So how can we be motivated to, or at least there was an analysis I saw that 70% of business travel would need high level of motivation to return to physical travel, whereas 30%, yes, as Daniel said, we have to go to Berlin probably to see the various things that he has to show, but there is a difficult situation to bring back business travel and trust and confidence there. Interesting things that our airlines were saying that's going to come out in the long term, that even though they are having drastically shorter planning periods and having to respond very dynamically to operational plans, that's kind of helping them to relook at some of their processes. Like, for example, two of the airlines that we were talking were saying, we're thinking why the schedule planning should not take into consideration the crew plans and improve the block hours based on that. Or we're thinking, why is the manpower plan not improving by receiving continuous feedback and not being a frozen plan 6 months ahead or a year ahead, not changing much? Take continuous feedback from the tracking phase, pairing and rostering phase, and keep improving. So those kind of interesting thoughts are coming out of this unpredictable demand responsiveness. That's on the business process side. Now, the part two I discussed with you is what airlines are doing on the technology part of things to respond quicker to these unpredictable demands. Interesting inputs that were coming out is that they understand that this is one of the area that requires digitization or has high scope of technology practice incorporation, especially in recovery and the shorter term replanning. However, in the short term at least, there is a tendency that they're going back to a lot of manual practices. I understand how much time some of our partners in US were taking. They were taking 7 days in every month to go on and replan their rosters every time because all their destinations were changing. They had to make sure that fatigue is implemented. They had to ensure that their FTLs are implemented. 7 days in parallel by the planning team and the tracking team is going on in a different direction. Everything is not aligned. But why they had the tools, but why are they not doing it using the tools? Why are they doing it manually? So they trust more in their qualitative practices. Plus, they also mentioned lower trust, which I already mentioned, lower trust in digital tools at these critical times, because nowadays that decisions are very highly cost evaluated or closely monitored because they need to control costs, which I'll come to later.
What is, by the way, interesting, we are always hearing from many airlines, hectic times, hell of a job. And on the other hand, the complexity is low in terms of crew members, counts, and aircraft counts. What is the explanation for that people feel it's hectic times if only 10% of the aircraft are up in the air or 20% are up in the air? Why are so hectic times? Steve, Evan, Christine, Maria, any idea?
When I think about hectic times right now, you're right. We're flying only a fraction of our network, but I think it's, and I kind of alluded to it earlier, I think it's the need to adapt and react to really a market that is unprecedented. I think what's making it hectic for us is really the unknowns, specifically from a planning perspective, without really having any kind of precedence as to what's going to happen next. What's making things hectic is the unknown, and of course also the effect financially on the organization, knowing that that we're really only earning a fraction or less of what we were just a year ago. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on any decision that you make, whether it's long-term or short-term.
So you don't think that it's also the technology, the bottleneck, that people who have to have a quick solution on ad hoc changes, regulations, new current time rules here and there? Is it maybe the reason that the IT environment the legacy is making things hectic because it's not so supportive?
I believe that's part of it. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, sorry, the other thing I'd say, Daniel, is again, maybe we're only flying 10% of our fleet. That doesn't mean 90% of the fleet are sitting there next to the gate available if you need it, right? A lot of these aircraft are either in long-term storage and unavailable for a day of ops situation. So, or, and of course, depending on exactly what it is you're doing, you may have to change the crew if you're flipping from a Boeing to an Airbus or whatever it happens to be. So, you still have that same level of complexity that you had, and the other thing I'd say is more so when we first started this, but I think it's gotten better, but there is an ever changing set of rules or travel restrictions that continue to evolve, and it's not a central body that's doing it. Canada is making Canadian decisions, and even within Canada we have restrictions between provinces, where if I were to fly to Newfoundland to see the icebergs, I would have to quarantine for 14 days when I came back to Ontario, right? So the environment we operate in has become much more complex than it ever was before as well.
Totally agree. So I've created this, I've talked to some of our airlines, and I've created this table with their inputs. So you could advise if you're doing things differently. So how this table works is really the main kind of changes or the main kind of ways in which airlines are responding, and how much it's technologically enabled, or how many digital tools are there to enable them. How do they classify the demand? Like, do they see it as a long-term process change, or do they see it as a short-term one, or something that may happen from time to time that's intermittent? And this is a timeshare. So I've sorted it based on the amount of time that airlines were spending. This table is more about immediate responses, what they're currently doing. And this is the timeshare of how much they are spending around in these kind of responses. For example, some of our partners, an airline in the US was spending 10 to 15 days of their staff time in changing their, for example, their check-in times because of the new immigration processes, changing their routes and destinations, having to replan their operations, ensuring rules, and that was taking that much time. And they felt that there was nil or minimal technical tools that supported them in that area. Recovery, fast decision making, information or decision support. They didn't feel that there was enough tools there, and they also felt that's a long-term technology enabling that can happen, because that's not just COVID specific, but a long-term thing. There was also importance in higher need of communication between departments to enable faster responses. So the absence of industrial standards or to communicate between a manpower planning system or a maintenance system or a passenger reservation system and an operation system created trouble in fast communication of information and integration of information, which made decision making slower during this process. So there also they felt that's not good enough technological enabling. And as you were mentioning, to respond to changes, for example, they had to have only two-thirds of their fleet in operation. Maybe they might have to shift their 747 crew members, like Delta has retired their 747 and had to consider retraining of their 747s based on a seniority basis onto other fleets. At least I'm sure KLM was doing that with one of our partners. So that required a lot of crew structure changes and fleet structure changes, which we were supporting them with. And definitely the big thing, transforming to cargo operations, even the belly as well as the passenger compartment, which required to change the FTL limitations of crew members, even the complement required to operate for crew members, even including fatigue risk over there. So that required a whole lot of changes. For example, recently for Etihad, we had done a very agile fix for transforming their operations or passenger operations to cargo. And all the associated flight time limitation and operation requirement changes of crew members that came in association with that. So these were the main contacts of immediate changes that were happening, and where we were involved with airlines and their feedback on how much time they took and how much of technological enabling there was in their respective airlines in these areas. The next thing is what they felt of these digital tools and practices would sustain in the future and would go on to become best practices. One of them, a point that you were saying, all of you were saying earlier, rethinking the planning process. Does it have to be so long? Is it good enough? Is it getting enough feedback from different departments to make a better decision? Also, another interesting aspect that's being discussed by one of our airlines is during recovery, isn't it a different objective-based re-optimization that we have to do on the rosters of crew members, or should it be, ad hoc changes that just considers the day of operation and the next? That kind of, because nowadays changes, there is a view of the changes that's happening to a slightly longer term. It's not a 1 or 2 day thing. It could be a 6 or 7 day change in destination kind of thing. So is re-optimization during tracking something that we can do, is what airlines are asking. There's also, look out for systems that are highly configurable with respect to making changes quickly. So I want to quickly, KLM was asking, how can I quickly transform my 747s into a different aircraft type? How can I quickly change the ownership code of an airline and make them employed with a different airline? How can I reuse my crew across aircraft types? How can I quickly retrain crew members and make them multi-skilled? So a high level of configurability is being looked at. And
Christine, I have a question. I have a question on that. We are talking about digital tools and about changing the business. How important is the change management component in that?
Change management is important when you're changing anything that's going to impact one department or multiple departments. My former job, we had a change management group that was there to assist with the implementation. I have a feeling, though, that as these changes are being implemented so quickly, that the change management portion is unfortunately being done after the fact. Although I do think that trying to think of a really simple example. Okay, I'll use the repurposing to cargo. The repurposing to cargo not only implicates the processes on board the aircraft, you also have to make sure that you take in consideration how long it takes to get the regulatory approval, how long it takes to get the supplemental type certificate for the aircraft type now being changed to not have any seats in the cabin. In terms of change management, you just have to make sure that every single person who's going to be on board that aircraft is comfortable with the change and understands what the implications are. The onload offload, they had to make a different solution. And it sounds odd to say this, but it's kind of exciting for someone who can put their creative thinking cap on and figure out a way to get cargo on and off an aircraft when you can't use a belly door. You're not using a wide door, you're using a passenger door. So some of the pictures I saw of them getting cargo on and off of a 787, for example, was absolutely ingenious. In terms of change management, I don't really have anything to say on that, because a lot of people think that this is going to be a short-term change. And in terms of Air Canada, they've tried to do cargo business twice in the past, and neither of them were specifically successful. In this case, they had to do it to at least bring some revenue in quickly. I really hope to see it continue. I hope that they are able to continue this type of business, although I don't know which aircraft they would use, because when they start filling 87s to fly with passengers, I think they're going to want to do that. I suggested a hybrid of passengers and cargo on board within the cabin that I'd seen some pictures on the internet. Who knows what they're going to end up with. But I did want to, and this is a complete pivot, which is my favorite kind of conversation, Something that I don't believe we've talked about before, Daniel, in any of our phone calls is, and this is way behind the scenes, in the corporate safety environment, you have to plan for aircraft accidents and incidents. So within Air Canada, they have a group that specifically does that called the Special Assistance Team. And they had a call center set up in Montreal, ready to be opened at, and immediately as soon as the incident happens. However, with COVID, you could not have the office to do it. So the first project that I was seconded to right after quarantine, and maybe this was bad, maybe it ended up with me, leaving because I wasn't working on my original job, but you know what? It's okay, because the experience I gained in this was invaluable. We created a virtual call center in a matter of 2 weeks, which is something that should have happened over the course of several months. And they actually had it up and running as an employee helpline all the way through my furlough, and until I left the company, until I was severed. They actually were shutting it down, but they needed to do that to show that they would be able to respond to any accident or incident. And I'm very proud of that group, because they were the first airline. They were just discussing with their other emergency response planning organizations. They were the only airline to come up with that. So a few other airlines went to them after the fact and said, hey, how do you do that? So what do they say? Necessity is the mother of invention. You scratch your head, you figure out how to do it. And then again, to come back to my initial point, sometimes change management has to follow along after, kind of like someone sweeping up after a mess. They figure out how to implement that process into an institutionalized process going forward. They write a playbook about it. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Because I'm always saying digitization is not about technology, it's about human beings, how they are also affected from this and how they are supporting a business transformation process. Because why all the airlines have not done this, what you just described for the emergency response center, why business transformation processes were not initiated 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that airlines would have saved a lot of delay cost, passenger compensation cost, fuel cost, you name it, which would maybe enable them to also go much more relaxed through the crisis. And I believe it's all about the human being, which was not feeling the pain of a necessary change. And now there is this little thing called COVID-19, which is causing a lot of pain, and suddenly people start to act and do the necessary actions.
Yes, and my former team is called Operations Excellence, and it was only, gosh, about 14, 15 months old. Started off with a few people, grew to 100. Obviously, now it's changed. But that is all of these types of questions, preparing for the eventuality of ... are exactly what the group was looking into. And I have to say that once a lot of the noise, proverbial noise, was taken out by only flying 10% of the fleet, it made it easier, more simple to start focusing on some of the projects, like looking at the aircraft turn from start to finish, to look at OTP and how it affects the customer journey, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They're still working on that. I haven't spoken to them in a while, but I have no doubt that they're still working on that, because the COVID doesn't negate the necessity to keep running the airline to the best of their ability. So it actually gave them perhaps more space to do it, more time to do it. I wanted to make one more point, but I'm sure it'll come back to me. I feel like I've spoken enough for now.
Sapna, do you like to go on, please?
Yeah. So we were also hearing that in order to respond quicker, there would be more priority given to centralized data between departments. So there is higher priority to data-based decision making and data-based forecasts and predictions. And this also kind of linked to the point that there would be more people working remotely, and instead of more physical discussions and decisions, which is more qualitative, there is a tendency to go back to more digital tools and look at data and come out with a more data-oriented OCC OCC people, which I'll come to in a bit. So the importance on the data and what can be brought out of data, the analytics that can be brought out of data to make quicker decisions was also one of the things that most of the airlines we talked about were saying will come out of this. And obviously a more higher focus on end-to-end systems, because from the schedule planning onwards to crew manpower planning to operations to MRO to if that's a single system that covers that, the availability of the centralized data is easier, and the easiness to respond to things, like if it's completely connected to the reservation information from passengers or the maintenance cycles, then you can make your decisions much faster. So that was also a desire that was coming out from airlines these days. On to the second priority, that is controlling costs and liquidation of highly capital intensive resources so that there is more fluidity of cash. And what you see here is that obviously in the short term, for example, in the US airline region, the July revenues was down 91%, and there was kind of around $5 billion of burning during summer 2020 days. But the passenger numbers, the amount of passengers carried was domestic down 71% and international down 90%, and this was at the week ending July 12th. But there's also some silver lining there, or some reasons for hope there. That in the US especially, if you look at these graphs, sorry, it's not totally clear, but there's a domestic graph and there's the international graph. This is the North American graph over here, and this is the monthly change. You see that January, February was actually not in the negative, but from March onwards went negative. But it's actually kind of looking 20 to 25% better than the other regions compared to domestic traffic. So domestic was really a silver lining or help for the North American region. And it's also obvious that jet fuel prices has helped. It has kind of followed the GDP graph, if we could say, and it was lowest at around the April cycle, but it's coming up. Unfortunately, it's kind of reflecting how the passenger accounts and the revenue is going, but that's still a relief, and it's around $1 per gallon, which is good. And the repurposing to cargo has also helped. It is below the 2019 levels, approximately 20% below the 2019 levels. Even I've data only till April to say that in April it was around 21% below. But still, the repurposing to cargo is really helping the industry, or that's something that's helping the cost side of things. Overall, in the globe, we are seeing that compared to business as usual, ICAO and IATA are saying that to respond to these kind of passenger falls and these kind of revenue falls, the capacity that airlines provide would fall between 39 to 52%. That's full forecast for 2020, not the snapshot forecast. So based on that fall, of course, costs have to be controlled because that's the capacity we are offering. And let's see in the next slide how they are controlling costs. And one of the things that airlines we were talking to were saying is that the positive of cost control is there will be a cost-based rearrangement of operation, which would improve the operational efficiency of things. Like, for example, older fleets might be retired earlier, like British Airways had done recently. There'd also be more monitoring of their aircrafts or their fuel efficiencies. And one interesting thing that was coming out is there was high focus on our partners on relooking at their IT platforms and how efficient the IT decisions, the IT infrastructure is, and reworking on supplier contracts and things like that. So overall, they felt that this kind of a heavy cost-based cleansing would bring out a more operationally efficient airline. So that's what they saw as coming as a good thing out of the cost control operations. And that's the business process part. And that's the next part of it, how they are digitally enabling cost control. So they did see that they saw two parts to it again. The first part is how do we monitor, or how do we ensure that cost is one of the primary parameters in our planning and tracking of operations? How do we monitor, how do we predict kind of costs? And they felt that adoption digitally in that area is pretty low. But then the second part, which is the IT strategy and landscape relooking, that's heavily happening actually. For example, lesser critical projects are being shelved by some airlines. They're actually looking at, the low-hanging fruits. They're looking at very quick benefits, like the agile way of working is coming back. Give me benefits so the management are saying, give me benefits in 6 months. Give me an agile tool that works and shows me cost benefits. So they are looking at internal projects as well as working with us on very short-term value delivery projects. It was interesting to find that outsourcing of projects would not go down. Rather, on the IT side, it would increase because airlines are thinking about reducing their on-premise infrastructure. They're reducing their liabilities or their legacy system footprints, making more IT light and giving those things to external suppliers and working with suppliers flexible terms such that if these kind of COVID-related problems happen, they don't have to bear much of a debt, or their debt restructuring is such that they don't have to take so much liability. But it doesn't mean that outsourcing would go down. It would rather go up, is what airlines feel. And there'd be a higher movement out of legacy systems and on-premise infrastructure onto the cloud. And they'd be relooking at their IT system landscape, reducing the number of vendors there because they felt the pinch of having 20 different vendors and a very complex landscape with thousands of different interfaces and no standardization in interfaces. That all pinched them a lot, and lack of configurability pinched them a lot. So there would be movement to higher state-of-the-art technology, and there would also be movement to more outsourcing. And that's a short term, but in longer term, they're going to look at how they are going to monitor their costs better and how they're going to make more cost-based decisions in planning and tracking. Should I pause here or can I continue? I've been talking quite a bit.
Yeah, if there are questions to Sapna or about the topics, please raise your voice. I think, Jeremy, you are new in the call. Maybe you want to introduce yourself shortly. Jeremy, can you hear us? No.
Yeah, I can. I'm not set up with the headphones or anything like that. I'm just listening in right now.
Okay, so that's again my table again to see how much of sorted by how much of time is being spent by airlines in cost control and reduction. So mainly Sun Express closing down their Germany hub, or old aircrafts being retired. A lot of change in aircrafts, a lot of restructuring in crew, as we were talking about. Suspension of some bases and consolidations happening. So all that requires a lot of involvement of IT, but they feel that's low. We already discussed how cost evaluated plans and operations can be. So earlier, airlines used to discuss with us so many different parameters to run their recovery optimizations. But now they say number one is cost. Show me your scenarios, or show me your plans that show cost minimization. That's the difference in communications that we are having with the airlines recently. There's also, we discuss IT landscape and IT strategy changes that are happening because their airlines see a lot of reduction in cost scope. And interestingly, some airlines were thinking about a multi-skilled task force or consolidated operations. This is not a short-term thing, it's more of a long-term thing. So recently I was talking to an ANA who was saying that they are thinking about having more of their pilots and crew cross-qualified to operate more aircraft types. They also, and another airline was saying that they were, instead of having their own aircrafts and own crew, they might in the long term think about more contract-based agreements with resources. So leasing might come up more to make fluidity higher in their resources. And of course, when they think about cost control, they are thinking about how their processes can be made more efficient. Like For example, Peach was telling us that they can improve their cost very much by including their block hours that their pairing optimizer was producing into their schedule management process, and thus reducing the time of their staff and reducing the or increasing the productivity of operations. So those kind of continuous improvement thoughts were coming up with which companies like us work with airlines.
Sapna, looking on the time, we still have 14 minutes. Maybe we jump on slide 13, 14, 15. Maybe you consider that we only have 13 minutes left.
Yes. So I'm going to now focus on more of what airlines are saying. Good practices that are coming out of their short-term, re-engineering, or what's going to sustain with time post-COVID. So cost-based, of course, they're seeing cost and efficiency analytics coming out of it, and prediction-based algorithms coming out of it. And scalability, that is, the software or tools should be scalable in order to adjust to operation volume changes and crew and fleet structure changes, and being able to share crew and aircrafts within airlines. Modularity is something they are very much interested in, because as we mentioned earlier, they're very much interested in early value. So give me something that helps me communicate quickly with my immigration department. Give me something that helps me communicate quickly with my crew members and respond back, or something that helps communicate with my hotel suppliers or transport providers, and give me small automations in those areas so we can respond quickly to crisis. Very important point that they are looking for cloud adapted partners and mature agile partners in this area. That's the long-term things that I've seen coming out. The third thing that we're discussing here is very much something that we all were talking about, safety, trust, and confidence, instilling that in customers as well as the staff. It seems as if our airlines are saying that safety is the new differentiator, because the more safer your messages to your customers, the better the chance of you differentiating yourselves and having more business in the future. There's also another aspect to it that was coming out, that regulatory bodies were changing their rules so often depending on how, the fluctuations in peaks and troughs of COVID infections across the globe. There was not a standard process or a standard timeline within which requirements of safety was changing. One country would say that these are my regulations, another country would say these are my regulations. So airlines had to very quickly respond to it, and they were hoping there was standard global procedures here. But they did feel that in the process, they would come up with some very good contactless self-service practices. For example, in their check-in, or in their immigration, or in their crew briefing practices, which they think would move on and become long-term practices. So more automations coming there in self-service contactless practices, which they see carrying on. These are some of the things that they're currently doing, but some of the important points that's coming out of implementing operational safety is that most important, for example, the 14-day quarantine principle that several countries had, which was also applicable to crew members. We were part of working with a lot of airlines who were struggling to make that change in their systems. How do we ensure that a crew who's traveled to mainland China hasn't traveled to Sydney in the last, and keep them away for 14 days? And also with that, ensuring FTA rules are implemented, also fatigue rules are implemented. So that rule side of things to implement on the airline operations side, there were huge challenges, and a high configurability was decided, and it was a true test of their rule and alert system at these times. And contact tracing and quarantine implementation tools were also some of the areas that airlines seemed interested in, but that is more short term. Getting our reports out of which crew has contacted which customer, which crew has contacted which crew, should they be quarantined? So easy tools to quickly quarantine. But in the long term, what was coming out was the self-service apps. So airlines seem to be more interested in, making briefing processes more on a mobile app, bringing more information to crew members rather than having to spend more time talking to each other in a briefing room. Automated check-in, of course, and those kind of contactless self-service apps. That is one area that they see coming out of this. Flexi reporting and post analytics, because their needs for bringing out, what's the cost of because of COVID, what's the block hour variations that has come because of COVID. All this was going up and up, and there was no tools to help them at that time. So they understood that flexible reporting and as well as central database analytics really helped them.
Sapna, I suggest we go on slide 14 now because we have 9 minutes left.
And to go to slide 14, there should be a bit of a flow I have to go through. I'll just quickly go through that flow, if that's okay with you. Yeah, I just want to say that the fourth aspect here is productivity, where airlines are moving towards more remote operations and agile workforce. So those are the two main principles that were coming out of it. How do we ensure our remote workforce effectiveness, and how do we ensure agile and remote workforce effectiveness? Because airlines were truly believing in early value and giving out early project deliveries. So for that, what was coming out of this and what was sustaining is definitely agile practices and the need to work with agile practitioners. The OCC being supported by data analytics and productivity monitors. More liquid resources being used, that is, as I mentioned, increasing utilization of resources, and very high importance on communication and collaboration tools between staff as well as departments. So from that, we filtered out all those things that airlines felt is coming out and sustaining the test of time and moving on to the new operational normal. And we have distinguished or categorized that as four different sections here. One is the business process changes. The other is the IT strategy and landscape changes, project implementation practices changes, and people practices changes. So at a high level, we have touched through all this, but I just want to reiterate that what airlines are saying, and I'm happy to hear from you as notes after this, or if we have some time at the end, what you think different, what you see additional to this, but mainly people practices, agile, flexi shift, remote workforce, and highly evaluated decisions. In IT strategy, more end-to-end systems, higher priority to higher performing systems that are available to work for staff that's working from home, that's scalable to different operational sizes. So today you'd be operating 90%, tomorrow you'd be operating 10%. That kind of fluctuations would be seen during the reopening phase. Cybersecurity and privacy coming out is very important. Cloud infrastructure coming out is important. And in business processes, that's one area we've talked about a lot. Basically, interdepartment silos would be breaking up, and there would be more systems that take centralized data and give you better decisions. More focus on short-term planning and re-optimization, and short-term planning would also be supported by feedback loops from other departments, which give out higher quality decisions. More self-service processes and multi-skilled force or resources. Project implementation part, of course, early win projects, which supports an agile mentality of bringing out results. Automated delivery of software, and also relooking at your project management processes. What are the flaws in the current processes? What's taking so much time? Is there too much documentation? Avoiding all those waste practices, making it leaner and having a leaner project lifecycle.
Steve, you see now here the new normal, and in a month's time you're going to present the new not normal. What will happen in this month's time? What will be different?
So to be quite honest, while we only have a few minutes, I don't want to monopolize the last 4 minutes. I don't necessarily agree with everything that's on this page. So why don't I kind of save that for what's not the new normal conversation. But if you go, hang on a second, things like, if organizations aren't or applications aren't cloud ready today, cloud infrastructure is long, complex, and not required. And I'll just give you one example, right? System consolidation. Again, it's a great statement. It's a great strategy. The actual ability to do that and execute on that at a highly efficient, while you're doing everything else, is actually can be counter to what it is you're trying to accomplish in the long run. So, we could probably have a very significant prolonged discussion on this page.
And if I might add, something that I don't see on the page, and forgive me if I'm missing it, is training. And if I use the example of flight attendants, of the onboard crew, I know that before I left Air Canada, they were talking about being able to do many of the much of the training could be done online as it was already, and they were looking at ways to convert more of the training to online. But they do still need to have some face-to-face, in-person training. Would it cost more because you'd have to have smaller groups? That was all to be determined, but that very much needs to be on this page somewhere.
That's a great comment, because it's also in line with Daniel Melendez's airline pilot panel presentation, where he was also talking about passenger training, because also passengers have to adapt to new processes and the different organization of travel and in flight and at the airport. And it was a quite interesting comment from him that he is also envisioning to train the passengers itself, not just the crew and the stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The other one that kind of plays in it, and I know probably a little more so for the North American carriers, but the whole the whole labor environment, a lot of this tends to turn a lot of that on its head. And there will be pushback and resistance from our unionized, whether it's flight attendants, pilots, mechanics, flight dispatchers, whatever it happens to be, because they'll want to protect as much as they can protect, right?
Absolutely. Sapna, please go on.
Yeah, so I've noted down these points.
We have 2 minutes, or now 1 minute only.
Okay. So these are some of on the digital side, the new digital normal, because digitalization has to go in parallel with the operational normal. This is some of the things that our friends have been saying would help. Integrated modular products, which would have central data and are connected so that easier decision making is supported and dynamicity of operations are supported. Centralized data-driven decisions. Continuous improvement functions, and linked to that more of IoT and machine learning and feedback loops, because process improvement is required and cost reduction is required, which will be helped by continuous improvement functions. And on the tech practices and partnership side, more agile partnership and higher focus on the non-functional side, like speed and scalability and reliability in remote work environments. And platform and device dependent self-service application supporting partners and remote implementation partners. So these are some of the key points that were coming out from past discussions that would digitally help sustained efficiency and go into a new digital normal. As a last word, I would say that I also believe in the saying that which doesn't kill us would make us stronger, and let you airlines and us digital partners work together and keep walking and keep flying and soar out of the ashes of the situation. Thank you for all your inputs and feedback.
Thank you. I think it was a great discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sapna. Also, thank you very much for all the attendees for the very lively, comments and questions. And I just want to show you the next dates coming. And now I have here an issue with my iFlight Lite, unfortunately. Sorry for that. Sometimes my computer is not that digital as it should be. So these are the next dates for the Virtual Ops 2020 season, and I'm looking very much forward to our next guest speaker slot on the 4th of August and the 26th of August. Steve, I'm looking very much forward to learn about the new not normal from you. But I think also the 4th of August, Collaborate to Disrupt Disruptions will be a fantastic presentation. I thank you very much for attending the session, and very important, please stay all healthy and well, and looking forward to having you with us in one of the upcoming Virtual Ops 2020 sessions. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Daniel. Take care.
Thank you all.
Stay safe.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
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 Bye bye.